She had been planning this wedding for 11 months. The venue was booked. The dress had been fitted 3 times until it was exactly right. The flowers had been chosen with the specific care of a woman who understands that details matter and had spent 11 months making sure every detail was correct. The guests had traveled from 3 different cities. Her mother had cried twice already that morning just getting her dressed and had been crying at intervals since. Everything was where it was supposed to be. Everyone was where they were supposed to be. She was standing at the entrance to the ceremony hall in the dress that had taken 3 fittings to perfect, her bouquet in her hands, her heart full of the particular fullness of a woman who has found the person she wants to spend her life with and is 20 minutes away from saying so in front of everyone who matters. And then her phone buzzed. She looked at it because brides do not usually look at their phones in the final minutes before they walk down the aisle, but something made her look. One message. From a number she did not recognize. 5 words and a photograph. And the 5 words and the photograph ended the wedding before it began and started a truth that was darker and more complicated and ultimately more important than any wedding could have been. Stay with me. Because what came out that day was not just a secret. It was a reckoning that had been building for years and that changed every life it touched before it was finished. Welcome to Bishop Tales, where every week we bring you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories that stay with you long after the video ends. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. Are you in Nigeria, Ghana, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, South Africa, Jamaica, or somewhere else in this world? We love knowing where our family is. Now let us begin. Her name was Sola and she was 30 years old and she had done everything the way it was supposed to be done. She had finished her degree. She had built her career, 5 years in financial consulting that had produced a reputation for precision and reliability that made her clients trust her with the kind of numbers that required trust to be complete. She had been patient in relationships, not settling for the version of love that was convenient rather than right, not allowing the pressure of time or expectation to push her into something that was less than what she believed love was supposed to be. She had waited for the real thing. And when Dare Okonkwo had walked into her life 3 years ago at a professional development conference where they had been seated at the same table for a workshop on financial risk management and had spent the lunch break talking about everything except financial risk management, she had believed she had found it. Dare was 34, an architect whose firm designed commercial and residential developments primarily in Lagos and Abuja. He was the kind of man who was attentive in the specific way that serious people are attentive, not performing interest but actually giving it. He asked questions and listened to the answers with the full weight of his focus. He was funny in the dry and particular way of people who are observant enough to notice the absurdity in things and confident enough to say so. He was also, and this was the thing that had made Sola trust him in a way that she had not trusted previous relationships, consistently honest about things that honesty cost him something. He told her early on about the failed business venture in his late 20s that had lost him 3 years of savings and most of his professional confidence before he had rebuilt both. He told her about the relationship before her that had ended because he had not been ready for what it required and had known it and had ended it rather than continuing out of inertia. He told her these things with the directness of someone who has decided that the foundation of a relationship has to be accurate information and who therefore provides accurate information even when the information is uncomfortable. She had loved him for this quality most of all. They had dated for a year before he proposed and been engaged for 2 years before they set the wedding date, which some people in their circle had found slow and which Sola had found correct. She was not a person who rushed important things. She was a person who made sure they were right before she committed to them. She had made sure. She had asked the questions that needed to be asked and had received answers that were consistent over time, which was the only kind of consistency that mattered. She had watched who he was in difficulty and who he was with his family and who he was when things went wrong and when things went right, and she had concluded that the person she was seeing was the person who was actually there rather than a performance assembled for her benefit. She had been thorough. She had been careful. She had been, by her own considerable standard, certain. The 11 months of wedding planning had been the specific kind of joyful that comes from building something with someone who is as invested in it as you are. They had made every decision together. The venue had been chosen after visiting 7 options and comparing them against a shared list of priorities. The catering had been selected after 3 tastings. The guest list had been assembled and revised and assembled again through a process of negotiation that was warm and occasionally stubborn on both sides, and that had produced a final list of 212 people who were the actual geography of both their lives. The dress Sola had found on the fourth shopping trip with her mother and her best friend Kemi, and when she had put it on and looked in the mirror, all three of them had gone quiet in the specific way that happens when a thing is exactly right and everyone in the room knows it simultaneously. Dare had been, through all of this, present and engaged and characteristically honest. He had opinions about things and stated them. He had preferences and advocated for them through the specific negotiation of two people who are building something together and who both understand that building together means neither of them gets everything exactly their way and both of them are comfortable with that. He had been, in every visible dimension, the man Sola had believed him to be. The morning of the wedding she woke before the alarm. This was not unusual for her. She lay in the pale morning light of her apartment, which she had shared with Kemi for the past 2 years and which she would be leaving after today, and she did the quiet interior inventory that she did every morning, assessing the state of things inside herself with the methodical attention she brought to everything. She was happy. She was genuinely, specifically, accurately happy, the kind that is not performance or expectation but the real internal condition of someone who is exactly where they intended to be. She got up. She started the morning that had been planned in detail, the hair appointment, the makeup, the dressing, the photographs, each step accounted for and sequenced. Her mother arrived at 8 and cried when she saw her, and Kemi cried too, and Sola herself held together through the crying with the composure of someone who knows that if she starts she will not stop and she has a schedule to maintain. She held her mother and she held Kemi, and she felt the full warmth of being loved by the specific people who had always loved her, and she was, in those moments, completely and unreservedly herself. By 11:45 she was at the ceremony venue, standing at the entrance to the hall in her dress with her bouquet and her mother's hand in hers and the sound of the music beginning inside and 212 people seated and waiting. The officiant had begun the introduction. The signal was coming. She was 20 minutes from the moment she had been working toward for 11 months and 3 years, and a long time before that if she was honest, the moment of choosing and being chosen by someone she was certain about. Her phone was in a small purse that Kemi was holding. She did not know why she asked for it. Some instinct that she could not name and would not have acted on in any other circumstance made her say, "Kemi, give me my phone for a second." Kemi gave her a look that communicated everything Kemi thought about brides using their phones in the final minutes before they walked, but handed it over. Sola looked at the screen. There was a message from a number she did not have saved. The message said, "You deserve to know the truth." Below the message was a photograph. She looked at the photograph. She looked at it for long enough to be certain about what she was seeing, which did not take long because the photograph was clear and the people in it were recognizable and the context of it was unmistakable. Then she looked up. Her mother was watching her with the expression of someone who has noticed a change in a face they know very well and is trying to understand what caused it. Kemi was watching her with the expression of someone who is already preparing to help with whatever comes next. Sola said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I need 5 minutes." She walked away from the entrance to the hall with her phone in her hand and her bouquet and her perfectly fitted dress and the sound of 212 people waiting inside, and she stood in a small anteroom off the main corridor and she looked at the photograph again and she forwarded it to Dare with one sentence. She said, "Tell me this is not what it looks like." 3 seconds passed. 5. 10. His response came at the 15-second mark. He said he could explain. He did not say it was not what it looked like. He said he could explain. Now friends, I need to stop here because if you are watching this and your chest has just done something, if you felt those 15 seconds like they were happening to you, you are exactly where Bishop Tails wants you to be. Please like this video right now and drop a comment below. Tell us what you think that photograph showed. Tell us what you would have done if you were Sola standing in that anteroom. Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it right now, because what happens in the next hour of this story is something that will stay with you for a very long time. She walked back out to where her mother and Kemi were standing. She handed Kemi the phone and said, "Look at it." Kemi looked at it. Kemi's face did the thing that Sola had watched Kemi's face do many times in 22 years of friendship when she was processing something that was bad and trying to decide how to respond to it with the full weight of her loyalty to Sola present in the decision. She said, "What do you want to do?" Sola said she needed to speak to Dare. Kemi said she would handle the ceremony hall. She said she would tell the officiant there was a brief delay and to keep the music playing and she would manage the room. She said go. Sola went. She found Dare in the room reserved for the groom, a well-appointed space off the main corridor with mirrors and good light and his groomsmen standing around in various states of formal preparedness. When she opened the door and walked in, there was a moment of collective surprise at a bride appearing in the groom's room before the ceremony, the tradition of it being unconventional enough to produce immediate attention. Then Dare saw her face and said to the groomsmen that he needed a moment alone with Sola. They filed out with the specific awkward efficiency of men who understand that something significant is happening and their job is to be elsewhere for it. She closed the door. She looked at him. He was wearing the suit they had chosen together, the charcoal gray that she had said made him look exactly like the person she was marrying and that he had said was the highest possible endorsement for a suit. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been caught in a specific way and knows it and is in the process of deciding what honesty now requires of him. She held up her phone with the photograph visible on the screen. She said, "Tell me." He sat down. He sat down on the chair by the mirror and put his hands on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment and then looked at her. He said the photograph was taken 4 months ago. She said she was listening. He said there was a woman, her name was Ada, they had known each other from before, from the failed business period, she had been there through the worst of it. She said she was still listening. He said it had not been a relationship, not officially, not intentionally, but things had been complicated between them for a long time and 4 months ago in a moment that he could not fully account for even to himself, they had seen each other and things had happened that should not have happened. He said he had ended it immediately afterward. He said he had told Ada clearly that it was a mistake and that he was committed to Sola and that contact needed to stop. He said he had intended to tell Sola but had not found the right way and then more time had passed and he had told himself it was finished and telling her would cause pain without purpose and he had made the wrong decision. He said he was sorry. Sola stood in the groom's room with her bouquet and her dress and the sound of the music from the ceremony hall coming faintly down the corridor and she listened to every word with the full attention she brought to things that required full attention. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. She said she had a question. He said anything. She said how certain was he that Ada had sent the message. He said very certain. She said and what did that tell him about Ada? He said Ada had been angry. He said he had thought things were resolved and apparently they were not. She said and what did that tell him about the 4 months since he said he had ended it? He looked at the floor again. He said he had continued some contact. He said he had told himself it was closure and it had not been closure, it had been continuation, and he had not been honest about that even with himself and certainly not with Sola. She said so what he was telling her was that it was not one moment 4 months ago. He said no. He said it was more complicated than one moment. She nodded slowly. She nodded the way she nodded when she was receiving information and processing it and had not yet arrived at the response because the processing was not complete. She said she needed to know one more thing. She said she needed to know whether he had been planning to continue this after today. He looked at her directly. He said no. He said he had genuinely believed it was over and had intended it to be over and had been wrong about what over meant and had not been honest with himself or with her about what was actually happening. He said he was not saying this to make it smaller. He said he was saying it because she had asked and she deserved the accurate answer. She looked at him for a long moment. She said she needed to think. She said she was going to step out and she needed him to wait. She went to the anteroom again. She stood in it with her phone in one hand and her bouquet in the other and she thought. She thought with the focused precision of a financial consultant who has spent 5 years making careful assessments of complicated situations and understanding what the evidence actually shows versus what people want it to show. She thought about the photograph and the 15 seconds and the explanation and the continuation and the particular quality of his honesty in the groom's room, which had been, she noted with the specific pain of someone who is being accurate about something they would prefer not to be accurate about, consistent with who he had always been. He had been honest. He had been honest about the uncomfortable thing when she asked him directly, which was what he had always done. He had also hidden something that honesty required him not to hide, which was the other thing that was true. Both things were true simultaneously. She held both of them and thought about what they meant together. She thought about what walking back into that ceremony hall meant. She thought about what walking away meant. She thought about the 212 people and her mother and Kemi managing the room and the officiant keeping the music playing. She thought about the 11 months of planning and the dress and the flowers and the venue that had been chosen after visiting 7 options. She thought about 3 years of the person she had believed Dare was, which had been, she noted, largely accurate. And she thought about the specific thing he had done and the specific way he had not been fully honest about it and what that meant for the question she had been asking herself for 3 years, which was whether she was certain. She was no longer certain. And Sola Adebayo did not build things on uncertainty. That was the most fundamental thing about her. She assessed carefully, and when the assessment produced certainty she committed fully. When it did not produce certainty she did not proceed. This had been true in her professional life, and it had been true in her personal life, and it was true now, in an anteroom off the corridor of a ceremony venue with 212 people waiting, with her mother and Kemi managing the room, with the music playing. The certainty was gone. She could not walk down that aisle without it. She went back to the groom's room. She opened the door. He looked up. She looked at him for a long time in the way of someone completing an assessment rather than beginning one. She said she was not going to walk down the aisle today. She said it clearly and without the hedging language that people use when they want to soften something that does not benefit from being softened. He closed his eyes. She said she was not saying it was over. She said she was saying that she needed time and honesty and the kind of clarity that she could not produce standing in a wedding dress 11 months into planning a ceremony that had been built on an assumption of certainty that was no longer fully accurate. She said she needed to understand what had happened and why and what it meant, and she needed to do that outside of the pressure of a ceremony hall with 212 people in it. She said if there was something real on the other side of that understanding she was willing to find it. She said she could not promise what that looked like. She said she was only promising to be honest about what the process produced. He said he understood. He said she was right. He said he was sorry. She said she knew. She said she was going to go and speak to her mother and Kemi and the officiant. She said he should stay where he was. She walked down the corridor to the room where Kemi was waiting. Kemi took one look at her face and said okay. She said not today. Kemi said I am here. What do you need? Sola said she needed Kemi to go into the ceremony hall and tell people calmly that the wedding was postponed and that she would be in touch. She said she was going to go find her mother. Kemi said I will handle it. Sola said I know. That was one of the constant and reliable things in her life that had never required uncertainty. Kemi walked into the ceremony hall with the specific composure of a woman who has decided what this moment requires and has organized herself to provide it. She walked to the front and she spoke to the guests with the directness and warmth of someone who understands that the people in this room love Sola and deserve to be spoken to honestly rather than managed. She said there had been a development and the wedding would not be taking place today, and that she asked for everyone's understanding and patience and that Sola would be in touch when she was ready. She said she knew this was not what anyone had come here for and she was sorry for the inconvenience, and she thanked everyone for their love and their presence. She said it simply and it landed as simply as it was said. The room responded in the specific way of rooms full of people who care about the same person and who have just received unexpected news. There was a collective adjustment, an out-breath of something that was not quite shock because the manner of the announcement had been too calm for shock, something more like the particular sobriety of a gathering of people who understand that something significant has happened and are choosing to be decent about it. Some people came forward with concern. Some went to find family members. Some sat quietly with their thoughts. 2 of Dare's groomsmen exchanged a look that communicated something specific. Nobody caused a scene. The room was, in its collective response to an impossible moment, better than it needed to be. Sola's mother found her in the anteroom. She came in and closed the door and looked at her daughter in the way that mothers look at daughters when they are trying to read through the surface of compose to the actual interior. She said, "My darling." Sola said, "I am all right, Mama." Her mother said, "You do not have to be all right." Sola said, "I know." She said, "I am all right anyway." Her mother said, "Tell me." Sola told her. She told her everything, the message and the photograph and the groom's room and what Dare had said and what she had assessed and what she had decided. Her mother listened with her hands folded and her face very still, in the specific stillness of a woman receiving information about her child's pain and managing her own response to it so that the management does not add to the pain. When Sola finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you believe him when he says it is over?" Sola said she believed that he believed it was over. She said whether it was actually over was a different question and one that required more than one afternoon to answer. Her mother said, "And you?" She said, "What do you need?" Sola said she needed to go home and take this dress off and think without the dress on. Her mother said, "Then let us go." They went. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. Real grief rarely is. Sola went to work because work was what she knew how to do and because her clients did not care about her wedding and needed the precision and reliability they had come to expect from her, and providing it was its own kind of anchor in a period where the rest of her life felt unmoored. She called Kemi every evening. She called her mother twice a week. She did not call Dare. Dare called her twice in the first week. She did not answer. He sent a message saying he would wait. He said he would not pressure her. He said he was going to use the time to be honest with himself about what had happened and why, in a way that he had not been honest with himself before. He said he was going to seek help with that honesty. He said he was telling her not to perform it for her but because it was the accurate account of what he was doing. She read the message and did not respond and carried it somewhere quiet. The person who sent the photograph turned out to be Ada herself. This was not a surprise to Sola once she had thought about it. Ada had been angry, which was understandable. Ada had been lied to as well, in the specific way that people are lied to when someone they care about is managing two situations simultaneously and telling each one the version of the truth that manages their involvement while concealing the other. Ada had not been a villain in this story. She had been, in her own way, another person who had been told what she needed to hear rather than what was accurate. Sola thought about this carefully because she was a person who thought carefully about the full picture of situations rather than the portion of it that was most convenient to her own position. She reached out to Ada 3 weeks after the wedding that had not happened. She did not do this because anyone told her to or because it was expected of her. She did it because she had questions that only Ada could answer and because she had decided that she would rather have accurate information than comfortable ignorance. They met at a coffee shop on a neutral street and they sat across from each other, two women who had been positioned by someone else's choices as adversaries and who were choosing not to be adversaries but to be honest with each other instead. Ada told her everything. The full timeline, when things had started between her and Dare, what he had told her, what he had not told her, when she had found out about the wedding and how. She was not performing innocence. She was not placing all the weight of the wrong on Dare. She said she had known he was with someone and had allowed herself to believe the version of the story that she was most comfortable with because the alternative required her to make a decision that was more costly. She said she was not proud of that. She said sending the message had been an act of anger rather than virtue and she knew the difference. Sola listened to all of it with the full attention she gave to everything important. When Ada finished, Sola said, "Thank you for telling me the truth." Ada looked at her for a moment. She said she was sorry. Sola said she knew. She said she believed her. She went home from the coffee shop and sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She sat with the full picture, the complete and accurate version of what had happened, and she held it without the desire to simplify it into something more comfortable or more clearly categorized as right or wrong. The picture was complicated. People had made choices, multiple people, and the choices had intersected and produced a collision, and the collision had happened in a ceremony hall with 212 people witnessing it. None of it was simple. All of it was human. She sat with the human complexity of it and thought about what she actually wanted, not what she was supposed to want, not what the situation seemed to require, but what she, Sola Adebayo, 30 years old, financial consultant, woman who had done everything the way it was supposed to be done, actually wanted. She wanted clarity. She wanted honesty. She wanted the person she had believed Dare was, the one who told uncomfortable truths, the one who had rebuilt himself after failure and had been honest about the rebuilding. She wanted to know whether that person was actually there or whether what she had seen for 3 years was the version of him that was available when things were straightforward and the version that appeared in difficulty was the one in the groom's room telling her things had been complicated. She wanted the answer to this question, and she understood that the answer was not available in a coffee shop or a kitchen table or any single conversation. It was available across time and honesty and the specific willingness to be seen accurately rather than favorably. She would need time to find it. She was willing to take the time. She called Dare 6 weeks after the wedding that had not happened. She said she was ready to talk. He said he would be wherever she needed him to be. She said she wanted to meet somewhere neutral. They met at a restaurant where neither of them had been before, a small place on a quiet street that had no associations with either of their histories. They sat across from each other for the first time since the groom's room, and she looked at him with the same full attention she had always brought to things that mattered, and she said she had questions and she needed him to answer them completely and without the management of her response as a goal. He said yes. She asked everything. She asked why it had started. She asked what he had told Ada about his situation. She asked at what point he had understood that what was happening was not something he could justify to himself and what he had done with that understanding. She asked what help he had sought. He had mentioned it in the message and she wanted to know specifically. He answered everything. He did not answer strategically. He answered the way he had answered in the groom's room, with the honesty that cost him something, with the accuracy that made the things he said difficult to say. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she said she had thought about what she wanted. She said she was not ready to rebuild what they had been building because what they had been building had been built on an assumption of honesty that had not been entirely accurate, and she could not simply pick up from that point and continue as though the ground was the same ground. She said that did not mean she was certain it was over. She said she was certain that what was required now was something different from what they had been doing. She said she was willing to find out what that something different was, slowly, honestly, without the pressure of a ceremony or a schedule or the expectation of anyone who had come to a venue and sat in a chair and heard music playing. She said she was willing to start from where they actually were rather than from where they had planned to be. She said that was not a promise of a destination. It was a willingness to be honest about the journey. He said that was more than he had expected. She said she knew. She said it was what she had decided, and what she decided she usually meant. They began again. Slowly. From the actual beginning rather than from where they had been trying to finish. They talked in ways they had not talked before, with the specific honesty that is only available after something has gone wrong and the performance of everything being fine is no longer an option. He was in therapy. He was doing the work, not as a performance for Sola's benefit but as a genuine process of understanding what had made deception feel available to him in a period when he had told himself he was a person for whom it was not. She watched him do this work across months, and she assessed what she saw with the same careful attention she had always brought to important things. She was not naive about what she was assessing. She was not giving him credit for effort rather than outcomes. She was watching the outcomes and measuring them against what she knew and what she was learning and what the evidence across time produced. She also did her own work. She talked to a therapist about what it meant to have been certain and to have discovered that certainty was built on incomplete information, and what that meant about her own assessment process and whether there were things she had not wanted to see and why. This was not a comfortable process. It was an honest one. She found things that were uncomfortable, ways in which she had occasionally prioritized the narrative of her relationship being right over the close attention that would have told her it was complicated. Not because she was blind or because Dare had been deliberately concealing, but because she had wanted it to be right, and wanting something to be right can make you look at the evidence slightly differently than you would if you had no preference about the conclusion. She held this honestly. It did not excuse what Dare had done. It was simply also true, and truth was what she had decided she was building on from here. 8 months after the wedding that had not happened, she and Dare had dinner at a restaurant they both knew and liked. It was the first time they had been somewhere that had history for them since everything had changed. They sat across from each other and they talked through dinner with the ease that comes from knowing someone and the care that comes from knowing that the knowing was built imperfectly and is being rebuilt more carefully. He asked her how the assessment was going. She said it was the most transparent thing she had ever been in the middle of. He said he was aware of that. She said she thought that was the point. He said he agreed. They ate. They talked about their work and their families and the things happening in the city around them. They talked like two people who know each other and are choosing to continue knowing each other with their eyes open and their expectations calibrated to what is actually there rather than what they wish were there. She did not have a moment of certainty that arrived with the clarity of the earlier certainty. What she had instead was something that she came to understand was more durable than certainty, which was a clarity built from sustained honest observation rather than from a single assessment made at a distance. She watched him across months, and what she saw was consistent. Not perfect. Consistent. The consistency of someone doing the work and being honest about the moments when the work was hard and not performing ease when it was not easy. She had always trusted consistency above most other things. The consistency across these months was of a different and more solid quality than the consistency she had watched before, because this consistency had been tested in the place where things go wrong rather than only in the place where things are going well. They were married the following year. Not in a venue chosen after visiting 7 options. In a small ceremony at a friend's garden with 40 people, the actual geography of their lives rather than the extended geography of obligation. She wore a different dress, not because the original had been wrong but because this was a different occasion and different occasions deserved to be what they were rather than continuations of something that had not happened. Her mother cried. Kemi cried. Sola cried this time, allowing herself to be fully in it rather than managing her schedule. Dare cried too, which was not something she had seen from him before, the specific tears of a man who understands what he almost lost and what it cost and what has been rebuilt and what the rebuilding means. The officiant asked whether they were ready. They said yes. Not in the way of people who have never been tested, but in the way of people who have been tested and have chosen to be here anyway, which is the only kind of yes that actually means anything. Sola thought about the anteroom. She thought about the message and the 5 words and the photograph and the 15 seconds. She thought about the certainty that had been gone and the work of building something that was better than certainty, which was honesty sustained across difficulty. She thought about Ada in the coffee shop saying she was sorry and meaning it. She thought about her own therapy and the things she had found there that were uncomfortable and useful. She thought about 11 months of planning that had not produced a wedding and 8 months of rebuilding that had produced something more solid than the planning had been aiming at. She thought about how the truth had come out on the worst possible day in the worst possible way and how the coming out of it, painful and public and entirely unwanted, had been the beginning of the thing that was actually worth building. The truth had come out. And what had come out with it, eventually and honestly and at considerable cost to everyone involved, was something real. That was, in the end, the only kind of thing worth walking toward. If this story reached you tonight, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Like this video and subscribe to Bishop Tales for powerful emotional stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and tell us this: do you think she made the right decision? Would you have walked away completely or done what she did? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. There are many more stories coming to this channel and they go even deeper than this one. Thank you for watching Bishop Tales. We will see you in the next story.